Right, and my colleague Khayelihle Khumalo joins us now in the studio to talk more about President Umaro Embaló's visit to South Africa. So, Khayelihle, let's just start with that issue of security, but particularly what's happening in Europe. We know African countries are divided on the approach, and we've just spoken about how Russia has sent 2 strikes into Kiev while the UN Secretary General is meeting the Ukrainian President Zelensky. But what is important about that is African countries have been pushing the UN to play a mediator role. What was the discussion between President Ramaphosa and his Guinean counterpart on, how this will be possible, given what the UN says is an impossible position it finds itself in?
Well, that's right, SABC. So when you got an opportunity to ask President Ramaphosa, in light of these developments, so we've seen this shuttle diplomacy, where we've seen the United Nations Secretary General moving from Turkey to Moscow and then to Kiev. So President Ramaphosa said this is a very welcome move, because from the outset, Pretoria has been very clear in calling for the United Nations Secretary General to be a very central player in this conflict, in terms of making sure that they use the power of negotiations and the dialogue. So that was a very important issue that the president really stressed, but also saying hopefully it's going to yield an agreement of some sort that will eventually lead to the cessation of hostilities, and really talking about the human suffering that you have seen, and we've seen quite a number of massacres being reported in areas like Bucha and many other areas as well that are yet to be discovered. But also position of Guinea-Bissau in this regard when it comes to the voting at the UN General Assembly. They've always been silent, but in this particular context, it's very clear, especially because with the linkages of Soviet Union back in the struggle days, so they're really sympathizing with the cause of the Russians, as much as they've not really been explicit, but by virtue of them not really being proactive in terms of their international structures, it really speaks volumes about where they stand.
Okay, and I mean, surely the whole issue of peace and security must hit home for President Embaló, given the fact that there was a coup in Guinea-Bissau recently, and his residence was shot up at some point. It wasn't clear where he was. So what was South Africa's conversation with how to bolster not only peace on the continent? I mean, the growing number of coups that we're seeing in the Sahel region, particularly West Africa, must be of grave concern to both parties.
Well, that's right, Tsepi. So in fact, President Ramaphosa said this really runs contrary to the vision of the continent in terms of development, in terms of making sure that we silence the guns in the continent, but also very clear about the disturbing events that we saw in Guinea-Bissau, saying it was really concerning what we saw, especially because you go back to the history of Guinea-Bissau itself. From 1974, they've had quite a number of coups. In fact, I think the last leader really who was in power uninterrupted in office just recently stepped, away from the office, paving the way for President Embaló. But President Embaló really pinning hope on South Africa to tap on South Africa's expertise in terms of learning. For example, one of the major challenges that they have is the issue of the drug trafficking. It's a transit point from Latin America to Europe. So it's a massive concern because they're really not capacitated to deal with this particular issue, to monitor their coastline. But when I tried asking President Embaló around the challenge, he said, look, my administration is working so hard in making sure that they deal with this pandemic.
In terms of coordination of the security structures of both countries, given what you've mentioned, so the peace and security aspect will go beyond the political and, as you said, protecting trade and economic ties, but and beyond terrorism. But I'm just wondering, the information sharing and cooperation, is there a structure that exists for both countries to be able to do so? Is there a discussion about, South Africa is involved in peacekeeping, but it's very clear about where its resources are being spent, quote unquote, and just how much it has to extend to other countries that may need some peacekeeping efforts.
It was quite interesting, Tsepiso, because President Ramaphosa, for example, commanded ECOWAS how they deal whenever there's an instability. There's always a rapid response. There's always a team of soldiers being deployed in the country. And currently in Guinea-Bissau, there is an ECOWAS stabilization troops that have been deployed in that country to make sure that they are able to overcome these challenges. But when I spoke to South Africa's Defence Minister, Thandi Modise, there was a clear assurance that they're willing to partner with their counterparts in Guinea-Bissau so that they really learn from each other in terms of the terrain itself, but also so that South Africa's defense force can help in terms of the training, in terms of giving capacity building, in terms of making sure that they are able to deal with these challenges, especially because this just comes ahead of that AU summit that will be held in Malabo, where the issue of terrorism, the issue of, just unconstitutional change of government is going to be a key feature as the African leaders really are concerned. As we know, Tsepiso, the Constitutive Act of the AU is very clear about these changes that are not really, just gaining any popular support, so to speak. In fact, President Ramaphosa going as far as saying that now there's no tolerance and acceptance of these coups in the continent.
Well, it should be a very interesting thing to discuss, because there's a question of legitimacy and the military questioning that of President Embaló. But let's look at trade and the economy, the projects that both countries are looking to work on. We mentioned some of them, particularly mining and agriculture. Were they specific, and were there timelines and budgets given?
I think the issue around infrastructure development, it's very pivotal, because we do know with the challenges that Guinea-Bissau finds itself. So they really hope that South African companies as well will be able to come on board. President Ramaphosa said there's a very clear interest to make sure that there's a conducive environment for South African companies to go to Guinea-Bissau, but also for the companies in Guinea-Bissau also to see a very fertile ground in coming to South Africa. But also the issue around also COVID-19. President Embaló was quite impressed by how President Ramaphosa, as a champion of the EU, has been able to play a role in terms of the vaccine acquisition, as much as there are still challenges in terms of the access in some parts of the continent. But I seem to have gained quite a green light in working that plan.
All right, great. Thanks for watching those developments for us. Khayelihle Khumalo, my colleague, looking at the state visit of Guinea-Bissau's president to South Africa and the talks with his South African counterpart, President Cyril Ramaphosa.